It was supposed to be the happiest night of his life. Celebrated preacher, newly married, surrounded by love and admiration, ready to begin a new chapter. But behind the carefully constructed image of faith and perfection lurked a secret so dark it would shatter everything. When his bride accidentally discovered the truth, their wedding night ended not in passion, but in violence, blood, and the beginning of a murder trial that shocked everyone who thought they knew him. What drives a man of God, someone trusted, respected, and adored, to transform into a monster within the privacy of his own home? Was it shame? Was it fear of exposure? Or was it simply the truth that the image he had built his life around could no longer survive the weight of reality? The tragedy of this story lies not only in the brutal death of a woman who thought she had found love, but in the hypocrisy of a man who could not face who he truly was. Before we dive deep into this chilling story, I want you to think about the question at the heart of it all: how well do we truly know the people we trust most, the ones who stand behind pulpits, the ones who vow to love us forever? If you're new here, welcome. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay with me until the end. This is not just a story about crime, it's about betrayal, identity, and the dark corners of human desire. The story of Pastor Ezekiel Grant begins not on his wedding night, but in the decades before, when he built the image of a man untouchable, righteous, and beyond reproach. Willow Creek was not a large town, but it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. Families had lived there for generations. The local church wasn't just a building, it was the beating heart of the community. Sunday mornings meant full pews, hymns echoing through the rafters, and a preacher's words carrying the weight of law. For many years, that preacher was Ezekiel. At 54 years old, he had become something of a legend in Willow Creek. His booming voice filled the sanctuary with fire and conviction. His sermons were not timid, they were fierce, demanding, uncompromising. He spoke about morality, family values, the dangers of temptation, and the sanctity of marriage. People listened because he didn't just preach, he commanded. Parents pointed to him as a role model for their children. Women admired his devotion and discipline, often whispering about how rare it was to see a man so steadfast, a man who had resisted the fleeting pleasures of the world to remain pure until he found his God-given partner. Men respected him because he seemed unshakable, principled, and strong. And yet, for all his sermons about family and love, Ezekiel Grant had never married. This absence didn't diminish him, it made him more mysterious. Congregants would often speculate about it quietly over Sunday potlucks and Wednesday Bible studies. Some said he was simply waiting for the right woman, a kind of Abraham patiently awaiting God's timing. Others believed his devotion to the church left no room for romance. A few, more skeptical voices, wondered if there was something hidden beneath the surface. But no one dared question him to his face. Because Ezekiel had a gift. He knew how to silence doubts with a smile, how to deflect curiosity with a scripture verse, how to turn suspicion into admiration with just the right story. He was careful. Meticulous. Every word, every gesture, every pause behind the pulpit was rehearsed in the quiet of his home. Behind that image, however, was a man who carried a secret like a stone tied to his chest. Long before Willow Creek knew him as Pastor Grant, Ezekiel had lived a very different life. In his 20s, reckless and searching, he had explored desires he would later bury under mountains of scripture and denial. His relationships were not with women, but with men, relationships lived in shadows, hidden from family, hidden from the church he would one day lead. And in one of those reckless moments of passion, he made a mistake, he allowed himself to be filmed. It was the early 90s. Cameras were bulky, tapes were physical, and the idea of digital exposure hadn't yet become a nightmare. He told himself no one would ever see it. It was just a wild memory, a remnant of a life he would eventually leave behind. But as the years passed, that memory turned into a ghost. He built his reputation higher, layer upon layer, brick upon brick. Sermons. Community projects. Counseling sessions with troubled couples. Baptisms by the river. With every act of righteousness, his secret became more dangerous. If anyone ever uncovered it, his entire world would collapse. And so, he buried it deeper. By the time Ezekiel entered his 50s, he had mastered the art of appearing holy. He fasted publicly, prayed loudly, and positioned himself as the moral compass of Willow Creek. He was called upon for weddings, funerals, and crises. His words carried weight at town meetings. He was more than a preacher, he was a symbol. But symbols are fragile. There were nights when Ezekiel would sit alone in his parsonage, staring at the small leather case that held the camcorder. He couldn't bring himself to destroy it. Why? Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps a part of him couldn't let go of the man he once was. Perhaps he believed it was proof that, at some point in his life, he had been truly seen. No one else knew. No one else suspected. Or so he thought. Because the whispers were always there. Congregants who noticed how he avoided certain conversations. Older church women who wondered why he had turned down so many respectable women over the years. Younger men in the church who felt an odd intensity in his mentorship. Nothing was ever proven. Nothing was ever said aloud. But Ezekiel knew, some people sensed it. And sensing was enough to terrify him. Fear drove him deeper into his role. He became more outspoken, more aggressive in his sermons about sinful lifestyles. He thundered about the dangers of living a lie, about the wrath of God on those who strayed. Every word he hurled into the congregation was, in truth, hurled at himself. The louder he preached, the more convincing his mask became. To the world, he was untouchable. To himself, he was a man on borrowed time. When he met Clara Mitchell, he thought, perhaps, he had found his escape. At 48, Clara was not naive. She had endured 2 divorces, survived heartbreak, and raised questions about whether she would ever find love again. But she saw something in Ezekiel that others didn't. She saw patience. Gentleness. A man who, unlike her former husbands, didn't rush her, didn't demand from her, didn't play games. Their courtship was slow. Coffee dates after church. Walks by the river. Hours of scripture reading and prayer together. To Clara, it was pure. It was what she had always wanted. A partner who led with faith. To Ezekiel, it was strategy. Clara was kind, respectable, and devoted. By marrying her, he could silence the whispers once and for all. A preacher, finally wed. A man whose life reflected the very sermons he delivered. No one would ever think to question him again. Their engagement was celebrated by the entire congregation. The wedding was planned with joy. And as Ezekiel stood at the altar, watching Clara walk toward him in her lace dress, he told himself this was the final step. His past would remain buried forever. His future would be secure. But secrets do not vanish. They wait. They linger. And sometimes, they appear when you least expect them. On the very night you believe you finally outrun them. Clara Mitchell was no stranger to disappointment. At 48, she carried the quiet dignity of a woman who had been wounded, yet refused to let bitterness consume her. Twice married, twice abandoned, she had long stopped believing in fairy tales. Her friends often teased her gently, saying she had given up on love, but Clara would smile and shrug. Maybe love just isn't for everyone, she'd say. But beneath that smile, there was always a flicker of yearning. Clara wanted companionship, not grand gestures or sweeping romance, but simple, steady love. She longed for someone to sit with her on the porch during quiet evenings, to pray with her at night, to share in both silence and laughter. And when she met Pastor Ezekiel Grant, she thought, perhaps, her longing had finally found an answer. Their paths first crossed at a church luncheon. Clara had attended Willow Creek Church for years, though she wasn't one of its more active members. She came when she could, sat quietly, and slipped out without much notice. But one afternoon, while helping serve food at the potluck, she found herself standing across from Ezekiel. He smiled warmly, thanking her for volunteering. His voice was steady, his gaze calm. Clara felt a flutter of something she hadn't felt in years, not infatuation, but comfort. Over the next few months, Ezekiel began seeking her out after services. Their conversations were never forced. He asked about her day, her work, her past. Unlike others, he didn't judge her for her divorces. He listened. He offered encouragement. Slowly, he became a fixture in her life. When he suggested they meet outside of church for coffee, Clara hesitated at first. She was wary of men, wary of promises. But Ezekiel's patience disarmed her. He didn't pressure, didn't rush. And so, she agreed. Their coffee date stretched into hours. He spoke about scripture, about God's timing, about the importance of faith in relationships. Clara found herself leaning into his words, drawn not just to the preacher but to the man beneath the collar. When Clara told her family about Ezekiel, reactions were mixed. Her sister, Margaret, raised an eyebrow. "Clara, he's 54 years old and has never been married. Doesn't that strike you as strange?" Clara brushed it off. "Not everyone marries young, Margaret. Maybe he was waiting for the right woman. Maybe that woman is me." Margaret frowned. "I just don't want you hurt again. Men who hide parts of themselves, it always comes out eventually." But Clara wouldn't be swayed. After years of loneliness, she believed she had finally been chosen, finally seen. Ezekiel was kind. He was stable. And he was offering her something she thought she had lost forever, hope. When Ezekiel proposed, it was in the most unassuming way. There were no grand displays, no elaborate plans. Just a quiet evening after Bible study, sitting together on a bench beneath the oak tree outside the church. He held her hand, looked into her eyes, and said, "Clara, I believe God has destined us to walk this path together. Will you marry me?" Clara's heart swelled. She hadn't expected it, not so soon. But the certainty in his eyes, the steadiness of his voice, melted away her doubts. She said yes. The congregation rejoiced when they announced their engagement. After all, their pastor was finally marrying. The whispers of his singleness were silenced. And Clara was celebrated as the woman who had captured his heart. For the first time in decades, she felt like she belonged. The morning of the wedding was filled with nervous excitement. Clara's lace dress had been chosen carefully, not too extravagant but elegant enough to make her feel beautiful. As she stood before the mirror, she barely recognized herself, the glow on her face, the sparkle in her eyes. Her niece, Rebecca, helped adjust her veil. "Aunt Clara, you look like a queen," the girl said softly. Clara smiled, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "I never thought I'd wear white again," she whispered. When the church bells rang, the sanctuary filled with friends and family. Ezekiel stood at the altar, solemn and composed in his tailored suit. His congregation cheered when he smiled at Clara walking down the aisle. To everyone watching, it was a perfect moment, a man of God finally taking a wife, a woman finally finding the love she deserved. But inside Clara's heart, there was a mixture of joy and fear. She wanted desperately to believe this was forever. She wanted to silence the doubts of her sister, the whispers in the back of her mind. She wanted to believe she had not been foolish to give her trust again. When Ezekiel took her hand and vowed before God and the congregation to love her until death, Clara felt peace. She believed him. She believed in them. And as they kissed to the sound of clapping and hymns, Clara thought the hardest parts of her life were behind her. What Clara didn't know was that Ezekiel wasn't marrying her out of love alone. For him, marriage was not just union, it was strategy. With Clara by his side, the whispers would stop. The questions about his past would fade. His image as a preacher would be complete. To him, Clara was not just a wife. She was a shield. But Clara couldn't see that. All she saw was a man she loved, a future she longed for, and a hope she thought had finally been fulfilled. That night, as they stepped into the honeymoon suite, Clara felt nervous excitement. She didn't know that the truth buried for decades, was waiting just a few steps away, hidden in a small leather case. The truth that would turn her wedding night into her last night alive. The reception had been sweet but modest. After the last slice of cake was eaten, the last hymn sung, and the final guest embraced, Pastor Ezekiel Grant and his new bride, Clara Mitchell Grant, were escorted to the Willow Blossom Inn. The hotel was just on the edge of town, a place known for its quiet charm and old-world elegance. The bridal suite had been decorated with rose petals scattered across the bed, champagne waiting on ice, and a faint glow from flickering candles along the dresser. For Clara, it was magical. For Ezekiel, it was suffocating. Clara laughed softly as she slipped off her shoes, the satin heels pinching her feet after a long day. She set them neatly by the door, humming to herself. She felt light, girlish even, as though the years of pain and heartbreak had been stripped away in one beautiful ceremony. Ezekiel, however, seemed distracted. He paced the room slowly, loosening his tie, adjusting his cuffs. His movements were deliberate, stiff, as though something pressed heavily on his mind. Clara didn't notice at first. She assumed it was nerves. After all, hadn't they both waited a lifetime for this night? She touched his arm gently. "We made it," she whispered. "We're finally here." Ezekiel forced a smile, kissed her forehead, and muttered, "Yes. Here." But his eyes lingered toward the dresser, specifically, toward the small black leather case that sat half-hidden behind the champagne bucket. Clara began unpacking her small overnight bag, laying her dress neatly over the chair. She moved around the suite with ease, humming again as she checked the little drawers, opening and closing them out of habit. It was then her gaze fell on the leather case. She tilted her head, curious. "What's this?" she asked lightly, lifting it into her hands. It was heavier than she expected. Ezekiel froze. His back stiffened, his hand clenching at his side. He tried to steady his voice, but it came out harsher than he intended. "Leave that, Clara. It's nothing." Clara chuckled, thinking he was being secretive about some kind of gift. "Nothing? It looks like something." She traced the worn edges of the case with her fingers, noticing how carefully it had been kept. She glanced at him, expecting a playful smile, but instead saw a flash of panic in his eyes, quick, sharp, like a bolt of lightning on a clear day. Her own curiosity deepened. She placed the case on the bed and slowly unlatched it. Inside was a camcorder. An old, bulky device from decades ago. Clara blinked in surprise. "Oh my goodness," she said softly, smiling. "I haven't seen one of these in years." She lifted it carefully, noticing the faint scratches across its surface. "Do you have old family memories in here? Childhood recordings?" Ezekiel stepped forward quickly, too quickly. "Clara, put that down." But she had already pressed the button. The small screen flickered to life, static humming before the image sharpened. At first, it was nothing but a blurred figure moving across a dimly lit room. Then, the sound came, a low laugh, male, husky. And then she saw him. Ezekiel. Decades younger, his hair thicker, his frame leaner. His voice unmistakable. He was not preaching. He was not reading scripture. He was not praying. He was entangled with another man. Clara's breath caught. Her heart thudded in her chest, disbelief rushing through her veins like ice water. She blinked rapidly, as though her eyes deceived her. But there was no mistake. The man on the screen was her husband. The room seemed to tilt around her. The champagne, the roses, the candles, it all blurred into background noise. Her knees weakened as she clutched the camcorder, staring at the image of her husband's past. "Ezekiel," her voice cracked, trembling. "What is this?" He lunged forward, trying to snatch the camcorder from her hands, but she jerked back instinctively. "Don't!" she cried, her voice louder now, trembling with both fear and heartbreak. Ezekiel's face twisted, shame warring with fury. "You weren't supposed to see that." Clara's tears welled, blurring her vision as the video continued to play. "Why didn't you tell me? Why hide this from me?" Her voice wasn't accusing yet, it was pleading, desperate for explanation. Ezekiel's silence was heavier than any words. He clenched his fists, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Clara's voice cracked again, softer this time. "You stood at that altar. You promised me honesty. You promised me truth. And this is what you kept." The flickering screen illuminated the space between them, the ghost of Ezekiel's past now alive in the present. Clara pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "People deserve to know the truth," she whispered. And in that moment, she said the words that Ezekiel feared most. His entire body trembled. To him, Clara wasn't just his bride anymore. She was the threat to the empire of lies he had built over 30 years. Every sermon, every reputation, every ounce of respect he commanded could vanish if she spoke. He stepped closer, his voice low and harsh. "No one will ever know." Clara looked at him, horrified. "Ezekiel, listen to yourself. You don't have to be afraid of the past. We can." But her words were cut short by the sheer force of his hands slamming the camcorder shut. The air thickened with silence. The discovery had been made. The line had been crossed. And the wedding night, meant to be the beginning of forever, had instead become the birthplace of violence. Ezekiel lunged. The camcorder fell to the floor with a sharp crack as his hands clamped around Clara's arms. She screamed, trying to push him off, but his grip was iron. "You can't tell anyone," he shouted, spit flying, veins bulging at his temples. "Do you hear me? You can't. I will not lose everything over a mistake I made years ago." Clara struggled, clawing at his hands. "This isn't just a mistake, it's your life. You've lived a lie." Her words, drenched in anguish, only fueled his fury. He shoved her against the dresser, the wood splintering under the impact. The crash echoed through the house. Clara gasped, her head spinning from the blow. "Stop fighting me," he roared, raising his fist. And then he hit her. Once. Twice. The sound of bone meeting flesh cracked through the room. Clara's cries grew weaker, her body folding under the relentless strikes. She tried to crawl, to reach the door, but Ezekiel dragged her back, slamming her against the bed frame. "You were supposed to be my salvation," he bellowed, his voice ragged, almost unrecognizable. "But now you want to ruin me." Clara's lips trembled as blood streaked her cheek. Her final words barely escaped her throat, "Ezekiel, this isn't love." Something primal overtook him. His fists descended again and again until her body went limp. The once beautiful bride, glowing hours before, now lay still, her dress torn, her hair matted with blood, her face unrecognizable. The silence afterward was deafening. Ezekiel staggered back, panting, staring at what he had done. His hands, stained with blood, trembled as he pressed them against his face. The camcorder sat broken beside her, its screen cracked but still faintly glowing. Ezekiel stood over her body, trembling, his breath ragged. The preacher, the man of God, had become a murderer on his own wedding night. By morning, hotel staff discovered the scene when Ezekiel failed to answer repeated knocks. They found Clara's lifeless body and Ezekiel sitting on the bed, staring blankly at the wall. When police arrived, he muttered only one thing: she wasn't supposed to know. The arrest shocked Willow Creek. Followers were torn between disbelief and horror. Some prayed for him, others denounced him. Clara's family was devastated, her sister sobbing that she had warned her to be careful. In court, Prosecutor Hughes painted Ezekiel as a man living a double life, someone who would do anything to protect his false image. The evidence was undeniable: Clara's blood, Ezekiel's bruised knuckles, the broken camcorder with the incriminating tape. Ezekiel's defense attorney, Marianne Cole, tried to argue diminished capacity, claiming Ezekiel snapped under emotional distress. But the jury saw through it. Witnesses testified about his obsession with reputation, his fiery sermons against sinful lifestyles, and his fragile pride. The hypocrisy became the backbone of the case. When Ezekiel finally took the stand, he wept. "I didn't mean to kill her," he said. "I just couldn't let her destroy me." But his tears didn't sway anyone. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. The verdict was unanimous: guilty of murder in the first degree. At sentencing, Clara's sister stood before the court, her voice shaking. She loved him. She believed in him. And he destroyed her on the night she deserved happiness. The judge delivered the sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Ezekiel's fall was complete. From the pulpit to the prison cell, from celebrated preacher to condemned murderer, all because he could not face his own truth. This story is not just about crime, it's about masks. About the lies we live, the images we create, and the destruction that comes when those masks are torn away. Clara died because she stumbled on a secret her husband could not bear to face. And Ezekiel, a man who preached about honesty and purity, lost everything because he could not be honest with himself. What do you think led to Ezekiel's downfall more, his violent temper, or his lifelong refusal to accept who he truly was? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story gripped you as much as it did me, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more deep dive true crime stories, and share it with someone who loves unraveling dark tales of deception and betrayal. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, the truth always comes out.